Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Are you having a good time?
Yes.
Absolutely. It's marvellous here. And I must say, one really important thing that I've got to do today is that I've got to ask all of you, please, can you give a big, massive thank you to the Hamiltons for organising this wonderful afternoon. Now that's enough of that, otherwise we'll look like the Republican convention, won't we? But it is, I must say, 2012 has been a fascinating year thus far, and a year that I think in many ways reminds us of the 1970s, because we have a Conservative Prime Minister who appears to be rather weak, we have a Chancellor who has U-turn after U-turn, we have the Liberal Democrats, who of course, remember, were very popular back in the 70s, until Jeremy Thorpe's Old Bailey trial. We have the Liberal Democrats plummeting, and we have no real fundamental difference between the Labour and Conservative parties. We have an economy that is mired with low growth, with inflation, and with high unemployment. And if that wasn't depressing enough, we've got just over the water, I think, possibly this autumn, the perfect storm that is about to occur in the Eurozone. Not only is there a German constitutional court case, there are Dutch elections, the Greeks are not meeting the bailout terms, and the Spanish. The Spanish are going to need a further $500 billion to stay in the euro. And I must say, I don't recoil at all from having called the Prime Minister of Spain, Mr. Rajoy, the most incompetent man in Europe, and that's not bad against the competition. So things look pretty grim in the Eurozone, and at some point there is going to be a total disaster over there. So you could argue that things are worse than they were, potentially, back in the 1970s, but there are some differences. Now don't remember that from bad things, good things come too. And I think that one of the good things that came in the 70s was Keith Joseph. Keith Joseph, Milton Friedman, some fresh thinking, and it all led to Mrs. Thatcher. Now, whether you love her or hate her, there's no doubt that her courage did turn the ship of state around. And try and say that after a few glasses of wine. There's no doubt that she had courage, she had wisdom, she had foresight, and we did again in the 80s become a country that was making things, that was employing people. Profit wasn't a dirty word. But I'll tell you this, I don't see a Keith Joseph in today's Conservative Party. I don't see a Margaret Thatcher in today's Conservative Party. I see some very honourable men and women who are the Eurosceptic rebels, but nobody, frankly, that is going to take control of this party and lead us out of it. So the big difference between now and the 70s is that now we've got UKIP. And I'll tell you this, for those people here who are not UKIP supporters, who perhaps are still hanging on to their support of the Conservative Party out of what I would suggest is nothing more than misplaced loyalty, that if you look at UKIP and look at UKIP's achievements, you know, we managed to come in 2009 second in the European elections across the entire United Kingdom. We have since then pushed on to the point that last Sunday's Mail on Sunday poll put us on 12% for the next general election, way ahead of the Liberal Democrats. So this party is very positive. After all, in John Major's time, and Neil would agree, there was much to object about, wasn't there? And certainly the same was true of Blair and successive European treaties. And yes, we were angry that successive governments kept promising a referendum and delivering nothing. And we kept making the argument that Europe was something that really mattered, that this stuff was going to affect us and affect our lives and affect our economy. Well, of course, as with all things in life, if you come up with a fresh new idea, you are ridiculed, you are described as being mad, bad, and of course, if you can see from this tie, cranks and gadflies. Why Michael Howard didn't understand the English sense of humour, I don't know. But if you abuse an Englishman, he will always pick it up and wear it as a badge of honour. So we were the gadflies, and we were laughed at, and we were told, no, 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 we couldn't possibly survive without being part of this European empire. And I often liken it now, given that our views are supported by over 2/3 of this country, and given that we're rising in the polls, I often liken it to that wonderful old story that the late great Bob Monkhouse used to tell. He said, when I was growing up, I told my friends and family when I was older, I was going to become a comedian. And you know, they laughed at me. Well, he used to say, they're not laughing now. And they're not laughing now. In fact, they're really rather scared of us. Well, so they should be. And here in Wiltshire, and Neil as chairman will know this, every seat next year is up on Wiltshire County Council, and I promise you this, UKIP will stand in every single one of those seats, and we will elect people onto Wiltshire County Council. And we will go on from there to fight the European elections of 2014, elections in which we came second across the country last time. No, our plan in 2014 is to fight those European elections, and it's not to come third or second. We want to win those European elections in 2014. And we want to cause a real earthquake in British politics. I believe this party now has the ideas and has the policies to become a great movement in British politics. We spent the early years, as I said, as essentially a protest movement, talking about who governs Britain. But we're now a party that is talking about how that Britain could and should be governed. And given that within our organisation, we actually have people who've had jobs in the real world, a tough concept, isn't it? Given that the college kids that run us have never worked in the private sector, not one of them, but we've got ideas for business. We've got ideas for simplifying the tax code. And we feel that Europe is now like us being shackled to a corpse. Yes. Because economically, it's going nowhere. Yeah. We turned our backs, ladies and gentlemen, back in the 1970s on a group of countries that now constitute 29% of the population of the world. Yeah. They all speak English. They all have common law. Yeah. They have similar accounting systems. There are real friends in the world. They're the people that stand beside us when we're in trouble. And the sooner we renegotiate our membership of this European Union to a simple free trade agreement and re-engage with the Commonwealth and the English-speaking peoples of the world, the better. And we'll apply that radicalism to education, we'll apply that radicalism to welfare, and I think UKIP is now beginning to be the catalyst for a total realignment in British politics. And there's one thing that is now really going for us. There is one absolutely fundamental difference between now and the 1970s. Because despite the fact that Thatcher and Joseph and others fought for a better future, the one thing that was absent in the 1970s was optimism. Everybody was pessimistic. You know, the older generations asked themselves, what have we fought 2 world wars for? The country was being run by half a dozen ex-communist bully boys in the trade unions. There wasn't much optimism about. And the funny thing about our country today is, despite the mess we're in, despite the levels of unemployment, I sense there is a real change that has taken place in this country, and it's a change that is being led by a younger generation. I spend a lot of time going around schools, sixth form colleges and universities, and I've noticed over the last few years that we now have a younger generation who are not prepared to accept, perhaps in a way that their parents and grandparents were, the concept that since 1945 that this country has been in inevitable decline. They're not prepared to accept in the way that perhaps their parents and grandparents were, that we'd always lose at cricket to the Australians, and we'd always get duffed up at football. Well, the football bit needs some working on, but there we are. No, I sense there is a new generation out there who are actually very optimistic, very bullish about this country. There is a new generation out there who are unashamedly patriotic. Now, how's that for a word? How's that for a word? Because for the last 3 or 4 decades, patriotism was the love that dare not speak its name. You know, if you flew the Union Jack, very pleased to see the Hamiltons up, but if you flew the Union Jack, you know, you were considered to be racist or extremist or dangerous. You know, the flag was an embarrassment. To be patriotic was to be an embarrassment. It was thought to be as if we wanted to go back to empire. But now, this young generation say, to hell with that. We want an identity. We want a flag. We want to be successful. We don't accept that this nation is in permanent and terminal decline. And the wind is now with us. Because, you know, the politicians, the Cleggs, the Camerons, the Miliband's, they are still stuck with that post-1945 negativity. Yeah. They are still stuck with the idea that somehow we're not fit and capable of running our own country, that we need to rely on very dubious judges in Strasbourg or unelected bureaucrats in Brussels to make our decisions. And I think the younger generation has actually, through what it's done and what it's shown us through the Olympics, actually reignited in an older generation a feeling that had lain dormant for some time. So I feel very, very happy about that. And I believe for those reasons, and that everything that we have fought for, everything that we have stood for, I believe that our time has now come. I believe that we now have the opportunity to change the future of this country, and I can assure you, all the while there's breath in my body, I'm going to damn well make sure that we do it. Thank you.